editor, nothing, I'm the publisher. That means I'm the one that loses all the money on every book. If I were the editor, I'd probably be getting paid. No, I started 12 Winters Press in 2012. I had gone through 2 agents and 7 years of waiting to try to get my first novel published, and I finally found a small press publisher to bring it out, and it was such a mediocre, lackluster, unsatisfying experience. I said, you know what, I can do better than this. So I started my own press, and then, as Deborah mentioned, in 2021, I think it was, I expanded to have an online journal, 12 Winters Journal and Miscellany, and Deborah and John Paul are among my readers, which I really appreciate, and I am John Paul's publisher, which I'm very proud of. John Paul has a masterful touch. He's going to get embarrassed. He's very modest, but what I love about John Paul's writing in particular, he both manages to have a light touch with description, but yet it hits you like right between the eyes. He has this gift for finding just the right details to bring out a particular scene. Like Deborah mentioned, I work with a lot of creative writing students, including MFA students, and that's one of the biggest battles that I have with narrative writers, short story writers, and novelists and creative nonfiction. They have a tendency to want to overdo it on description without necessarily accomplishing a whole lot. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, I think of myself mainly as a novelist. I did have a new novel come out this year, The Strophes of Job. Is available in hardcover and paperback and Kindle and all that stuff. And I've got some copies of that book and some other books over there, which are all free. So I've reached that point in my life where I'd rather give away 5 books than sell one. So please take one. And if you don't take a book, that's okay. But help yourself to one of these little bookmarks, which is festooned with QR codes, which will take you to places like tedmorsey.com and 12 Winters Press and so forth. And as Deborah also mentioned, I have a podcast, A Lesson Before Writing. I have a couple of co-hosts, and we get together once a month. And the tagline is, if I can remember it, writers, editors, publishers, and teachers talking about writing, editing, publishing, and teaching. And in every episode, we have a featured story, which is a new story just recently published in a literary journal that we kind of talk about what's great about it and what we love about it, and try to give that author a little bit of a shout out. In addition to my novel writing, I've been sort of obsessed with the Old English poem Beowulf since I was like 18. I was introduced to it my first semester at SIU Carbondale, and it really stuck. And even though I loved it, even at the tender age of 18, I thought that there were some plot holes in it. And it took me a long time to develop the skill set to start to figure out why that is, because Old English is so different from modern English. It's practically a foreign language, and it took me a long time to kind of get to a point where I could read it and understand it so that maybe I could figure out what was going on. So I'm going to read an excerpt from this ongoing translation in progress. I think I'm about 25% through the poem, and if I'm lucky, I'll be done in about another 6 years. I'm hoping that maybe after 4 or 5 years, summit fever will set in, and I'll be more focused on getting the translation done. Right now, what I do for the last year and a half, what I've done is Monday through Thursday, I spend about 2 hours on whatever novel I'm working on, and then Friday is Beowulf translation day. So slowly but surely I'm getting through. So I got a little introduction here, and then I'm going to get into the reading. I think this takes about 12 minutes or so. So I call my version of Beowulf On the Road, which is kind of a nod to the Beats and Jack Kerouac. We only call Beowulf Beowulf out of tradition. It didn't really have a title in the only manuscript that it appears in, so I took the liberty of giving it a title. And I subtitled it A New and True Translation of the Poem Known as Beowulf. I'll begin in the first section of the poem describing King Hrothgar's rise to power in Denmark. The poem is set in about the year 520, but composed orally, probably, around 200 years after that, and finally written down about 300 years after that in a precursor of modern English we call Old English, which is so distant it is practically a foreign language. There are some 350 modern English translations of Beowulf, but each translator feels that they can bring out some aspect of the poem that others may have overlooked or de-emphasized or simply gotten wrong. And I do feel like I have found at least one scribal error in the original manuscript, and I published a couple of peer-reviewed articles about it, which I'm pretty proud of. But anywho, here is my translation of the Old English poem Beowulf, at least kind of near the beginning of it. Then Hrothgar became known for his war glory and battle savvy, so that his novice followers blossomed into a mighty warrior band. A plan came to mind. He would command that a wondrous hall be built, a marvel to outlive memory, for mead drinking and the division of war booty among young and old alike. Everything God had bestowed, save for common ground and men's lives. I've heard that work orders spread widely across the region, summoning craftsmen of every skill to build the people's beautiful hall. As such, it was completed in no time, this grandest of great halls. He whose words were not questioned anywhere said the hall's name was Herit. True to his boasts, at banquet he gave gifts of rings, treasure galore. The hall towered tall, gabled with horns and beckoning the unholy flames of war wrath. The day of the blade hate had not yet been born between son and father-in-law, sown by a long-buried hostility. So even as the poem begins, the poet tells us, these people are screwed. This whole thing is going to go up in flames, but here's how it's going to happen. A darkness-dwelling demon, powerful with pain, had long endured the din of debauched merrymaking in the mead hall. The harp string sang stingingly, as did the song-shaping poet, who could keenly recount the creation of men from long ago. He declaimed how the Almighty made the earth, a lovely land ringed with water and a triumph of design, when the sun and moon were set in motion there, and how he ornamented every corner with branches and leaves while animating myriad forms of life. They lived prosperously, a chosen people, until the hell fiend, burned with rage, became fixed on their ruin. Grendel, the grim outcast, was called, infamous guardian of lonely haunts, fens, and forsaken wastes. The mournful monster had dwelt for a time among his kind, all cast out by God, the marked kin of the murderer Cain. For the slaying of Abel, the Lord exacted revenge. Indeed, he extracted no joy from that evil act, only the Lord's hostility and banishment from humankind. Thereafter were born all manner of monstrous things, ogres and evil-minded elves and ghouls who go among the dead, as well as the giants that waged war against God for ages, an outrage for which they were fully compensated. At nightfall, the ring-dane's foe fell upon the awe-inspiring house after the beer drinking was done. Inside he beheld the noble band abed amid their abandoned banquet. Their sleep was carefree, with no thoughts of the misery men must sometimes endure. The unclean creature, cruel and ruthless, was ready at once for a savage assault, and wrested 30 thanes from their rest. Proud of his plunder, he left for his lair, his hellish home, bearing on his shoulders the bloody slaughter. In the pre-dawn twilight, Grendel's war prowess was revealed, and the night's raucous feasting was replaced by woeful wailing. The famous king, long known for his nobility, sat stunned by sorrow. The great one grieved for his taken thanes as they beheld the track of that hated haint, that soulless specter. The fight proved fierce, pernicious, and persistent. The very next night he resumed his murderous rampage, dedicated as he was to death and devastation, to unmitigated malice, doling out not a morsel of remorse. Many were the men then who found sleeping quarters elsewhere, a room removed from the hall and its unwelcome guest, once the unmistakable signs of his savagery were made abundantly clear. To escape the fiend, the deft sought safety via distance. Thus did Grendel ravage right, ruling all until the hallowed hall was hollow. The Scyldings' patriarch suffered the pain of misfortune, the misery of unimaginable woe for an interminable time, 12 withering winters, which is where I get the term 12 winters pressed for my press, by the way, fun fact. Reports of Grendel's crimes were recited far from the site of his unending war on Hrothgar, so that a generation of children grew up hearing of his wicked and wrathful ways. He sought no substitute for his feud with the Danes, no pact, no price could curtail this deadly curse. Hrothgar's hall counselors needn't hope for a radiant reprieve from the death-dealer's claws. On the contrary, the monster, shadow-cloaked and death-draped, continued to hunt whomever he pleased, from battle-weary warriors to dewy youths, plotting and pouncing from the mist-covered wastes where he presided over never-ending night. No one can say where hell's messengers may meet them on that meandering path. So, mankind's menace, always alone, committed uncountable crimes, unending acts of evil that caused unbearable anguish. On lead, dark nights, he would occupy Heorot's lonely, treasure-laden halls. Unworthy, he avoided the hallowed throne, which was to be occupied by men deemed godlike, and never would he know such adoration. The Scyldings' heartbroken lord suffered a misery that was acute. Men granted authority debated stratagems by which the courageous could defend against the sudden assaults. Desperate, they would seek out heathen shrines and make pledges to the stealer of souls, soliciting diabolical assistance in hopes of halting the nation's destruction. Such was the heathens' habit of mind, their misguided hope. They imagined that turning toward hell would be their salvation. They knew nothing of God, the maker of everything, who would judge their deeds. Their ignorance didn't allow them to ask for the Lord's protection. He whose glory gilded the world. Woe to those who throw their souls into hatred's burning embrace, a sacrifice that will effect nothing, no matter how desperate their desire. Well, though, will it be for those who find the enfolding arms of the Lord. A protective Father's comfort and security will be theirs. Almost done. So Healfdane's son suffered ceaselessly, his sorrow seething without end. The best of princes unable to move past the perpetual grief. Nothing could overturn the trouble that had been wrought, that pernicious night evil. It clung to him, loathsome and cruel. In his distant home, a great man among the Geats, Hygelac's Thane, heard of Grendel's misdeeds. Among men back then, his might was unmatched, so too his nobility and his strength of character. He commanded that a sturdy, seaworthy ship be outfitted for a crossing upon the Swan Road to the War King, the worthy prince who was in need of equally worthy warriors. Clever-headed men declined to dissuade him, though he was dear to them. Rather, they hailed him a hero, confident in the signs they studied. The born leader selected from among the Geats the best and boldest, 14 seasoned soldiers, and led his troops to the heavy-timbered ship. The warrior knew the ways of the sea and marched them to the water's edge. The time had come, and the boat waited upon the water, floating just beyond the high beachhead. The eager warriors, noisy in their chatter, leaped above the twisting tide onto the boat. Each bore a splendid array of war gear, stowing it in the bosom of the stout, timbered ship. The glad warriors were launched then on their glorious journey. Wind-driven across the waves, the ship flew like a foam-plumed bird for a full day, until the sea voyagers sighted land. Before the curved prow rose glimmering cliffs, abrupt bluffs, and fanning forelands. Then their sea crossing had come to an end. The waiter Geats hastened to the hard ground, tying tight their ship, shaking out their mail shirts, and gathering their war gear. The crossing was easy, and pleased, they thanked God. From the high seawall, a shielding watchman charged with guarding the coast counted as gleaming shields were carried across the gangway, followed by other worthy war gear. Worry threatened to wreck him. He must know the minds of these well-armed men. Heavy shaft in hand, Hrothgar's man boldly rode down to the strand to interrogate this newly arrived band. Halt and identify yourselves, you chain-mailed men who have steered your ship here along the sea path, skillfully crossing the deep. Long has it been my duty to dwell at Land's End and monitor the sea for hostile mariners who mean harm to the Danes. No shield-bearing warriors have disembarked so boldly, not without displaying some sign they'd been granted permission. I have never beheld a man in battle gear of greater stature. Nowhere on earth is there such a fearsome figure, unless his physique and even his fine face deceive. He is no mere hall hanger-on, propped up with battle panoply. Now, before you advance farther into the land of the Danes, I must know where you came from. I must be convinced you are not false-hearted spies. Don't hesitate, seafaring foreigners, and take me seriously when I say I must know your place of origin. Their leader, who was eldest and wisest, unlatched his lockbox of language and answered, "We are from Gatland, hearth guardians of our lord Higelac. My father's name, Edgthow, was synonymous with nobility and known by people of many nations for his bravery in battle. He outlasted many bitter winters, proving their better before leaving his home deep into old age. His memory lives on among the wisest advisors everywhere. We seek your leader, Healfdane's son, lord and protector of his people. Our intentions are noble. Provide us your wise advice. We are on an errand of great import to the legendary leader of the Danes and have nothing to hide, I assure you. You must confirm if what we have heard is true, that among the Scyldings dwells some sort of destroyer, an enigmatic enemy who reveals his rage and the terror he brings on dark black nights, unspeakable acts resulting in shame and slaughter. I have advice for Hrothgar that comes from a kindred spirit, a way for he who is wise and good to vanquish this villain and cool his accumulated cares, a remedy that will bring sweet relief. Otherwise, he will eternally endure this troubled time, this everlasting season of distress, dwelling there in that high hall, gleaming emblem of his greatness." Thank you.